Hi everyone. I'm Vanshika and I'm the founder of Cool Kanya. Today we're here to talk about the future of content is communities with Evan Hamilton. Before I begin, we all know that content is becoming such a big space that fatigue from the sheer amounts generated every day is inevitable. That is why platforms that present well curated content selections have been thriving. Platforms like Reddit defy expectations and grow in interesting ways because the user gets to pick what they engage in. It allows for high quality content that evolves in surprising ways. Today, we actually have the director of community at Reddit, Evan Hamilton, who hasn't just built one community, but hundreds of thousands of very distinct communities. And he's actually been building communities for over 15 years. So, Evan, we're super excited to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm going to dive straight in into the questions because we have so much to cover. What do you think of communities and the way they grow in the age of mobile and social media?
Yeah, I think we are really at a turning point when it comes to social media. I think the novelty of sharing everything with everyone is starting to wear off a bit. And people are starting to realize that they want to have deeper conversations about specific topics or situations, and that they might want to have those conversations with different groups of people, right? You don't have the same conversations with your family as you do with your best friend, as you do with your coworker. And I think that explains why everyone's now catching up to Reddit and realizing communities are the next big thing, because the idea of putting yourself out there on, say, a Twitter or a Facebook with something very specific or deeply personal can be scary. And we all look for this sort of psychological safety of a community, a tight knit, closed space with people who we know are there for us. And so I think that is where things are heading. I don't think public social media will go away, and I think there's lots of benefits to it. But I think those safe spaces are becoming more and more important for people.
And how do you balance community growth and engagement? I think that's a question we all want to know. What do you focus on, like growing the community or engaging what you have?
Yeah, I think it depends a bit on your business goal. When I was at CMX, I worked on the Spaces framework. Highly recommend checking that out. And that talks about the different ways that community can benefit your community. And so there's support, scaling your customer support. There's product feedback. There's customer acquisition. There's content creation. There's engagement, and there's customer success. And I would highly recommend, if you're building a community, you really choose one of those as your focus. Later on, absolutely, communities can do a multitude of things, but you really want to focus early on. And I think that's really going to inform your growth. If you are building a product feedback community, I actually highly recommend keeping it pretty small. The more people you have in there, the more you kind of get groupthink. You get people standing up on their soapboxes and yelling about things. You don't necessarily get nuanced conversations. And so at Reddit, for example, we have a council of our moderators. It's about 50 people. We don't have more than 10 of them on a call at once. And we really sit down and go in depth on their feedback. Now, of course, we're combining this with product data. That's not the only data point we look at. But again, for a product community, you want to go smaller. If you're talking about a customer support community, then you want to go as large as possible. And the reason for that is you want to help as many customers as possible. Only a small number are going to answer each other's questions. And so you want to cast the widest net you can. And you want to have as many people as possible there to confirm or deny if they are seeing similar issues. And so the more you can think about what is my goal and what actually helps me achieve it, the better. And sometimes it's going to be very small. Sometimes it's going to be very large. But yeah, it really goes back to what is your focus.
Got it. Um, and when you're dealing with a virtual community and you have conflicts, and that does happen sometimes, how do you manage that?
It's a great question. There's not one answer, I would say, but it, I think, starts with understanding where the conflict is arising from. If someone is purely a troll and they're just there to cause problems, that's pretty straightforward. They want to cause problems. You should get rid of them. Often conflict is a little subtler. It might be someone who's feeling very frustrated that day and not understanding the nuance of a conversation. It might be that people are misaligned in their goals. It might be that people are just misunderstanding each other. So I really try and start with understanding what is causing the problem. But then the most the fundamental foundational things you need to do to be prepared for this situation are having a set of rules for your community,
Mhm.
making sure people are aware of those and that they understand them, and then being very consistent about punishment. And that doesn't mean that you have to be aggressive about punishment. It just means consistent. There's some good research showing that the consistency of a punishment really affects how much people pay attention to the rules. In the United States, the death penalty isn't super effective because it's not consistently applied in terms of location, in terms of crime. And so it's not something that people are actively thinking will affect them. Versus checkpoints to see if you've been drinking are actually really effective because you can't really go around them. You know what's going to happen when you go into them. You know what the punishment is going to be. And so they have a much stronger effect on how people behave. And so similarly, once you have your rules in your community, you have to be really consistent about how you apply them. And I think it's great to give people multiple chances, but that should also be built into your system. You shouldn't give one person 10 chances, another person 3. Everyone should get the same amount of chances. And so when you see that conflict, first of all, apply your rules. Is this breaking any of my rules? If not, then it's purely a conflict, and that gets into kind of interpersonal relationships. If it is breaking the rules, then you should have a process and you should follow that even if you really like the person. If it is something that doesn't break your rules, then it comes down to trying to help coach that person.
Mm.
I've definitely dealt with people who speak too much in events and they're not letting other people speak. And I know that person isn't meaning to hurt anyone, but they are. And my approach there tends to be, can I give them a job? Can I make them the note taker? Can I tell them to help me spot people who aren't speaking up and encourage them to speak? And try and, move them into a more productive space. If, you've tried this, you've tried talking to them, you've tried telling them the problems they're causing and they're not listening, it still may be time to remove someone. It feels really bad to remove someone, but then it feels really good when you see how your community improves afterwards. And so I think, moderation is one of the hardest things when we care really deeply about our communities. We don't want to yell at anyone. We don't want to ban anyone. But I've seen far too many communities negatively affected by bending the rules or allowing that one person to stick around and, continue to cause problems.
Got it. And Evan, when you look at a community, how do you know it's successful? What are the metrics that you measure?
Sorry for chugging tea. I'm fighting off a cold. Normally I would have my cup of chai, but rocking the chamomile today. Um, in terms of success, again, it's going to go back to your goals. So you want to make sure that the community is succeeding for the community members and for your business. And so for your business, again, look at that spaces framework. If it's support, it's going to be the number of people you are helping that are not having to write into your support team. It's going to be your customer effort score. Are you making it easier for your customers to get help? If it's product, it might be the number of pieces of feedback that you act on. If it's acquisition, it's the number of customers you're acquiring. So that's the business goal. On the community side, you want to start with understanding what is the goal of your community member. Are they here for belonging? Are they here for answers? Are they here to feel special? Once you understand that, then you can figure out what the right metric is to look at. Churn is always going to be a big one. If people are joining and then immediately leaving, that's not good. But you also want to look at the impact you're having. You might have, some churn, but the people who are staying are saying, this community is changing my life. And that's pretty powerful. So, I think it's valuable to understand what they are here for and then survey them on that point and say, hey, does this community answer your questions, or does it make you feel special, or does it make you feel like you're taken care of? So it's a little bit of a non-answer, but I think, again, it is essential when you're building a community to take the time to say, what are we trying to do as a business and what are we doing for our customers, and make sure those two things mesh together well. And from there, metrics become a lot easier.
Got it. And how do you extract actionable data from a community besides just conducting surveys? Are there any other ways you can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I love a good survey, but there are definitely other ways. In terms of churn, that's something that you can look at,
Mhm.
hopefully with your platform metrics, really understand, okay, when people join, how likely are they to stick around after a week, after a month? And what are the commonalities of the people who do stay? Generally, I find it better to look at the success rather than the failure. There's a lot of reasons someone might churn. Digging into the people who churned, it can be useful, but sometimes it's just messy. There's a lot of data points there. So looking at, why does someone stick around? What did that person find useful, and how can you achieve that for other people? So churn data is one. Um, Another data point I would highly recommend looking at is the speed at which someone gets a reply, especially when they're posting for the first time. Richard Millington of Feverbee has some really great data on that deeply affecting people's retention in a community. And that's something that hopefully your platform allows, but not every platform does. And so that might just be something where you have to pull out every post from a new user and manually write down, okay, when did they get a reply, and understand how well you're achieving that goal. I think don't discount surveys, but ideally you should be looking for a platform that will allow you to get this sort of nuance.
And what are some common mistakes made in building communities?
Well, I think that's a good segue because I think the biggest mistake is people using sort of out of the box consumer platforms for their communities. And I think this is really dangerous. If you're using a Discord, if you're using a Facebook groups, if you're using a Slack, although these are very easy to set up, people are very familiar with them, it can really trap you. You're not going to have very much data. You're not always going to have control over people's exposure to your content. Facebook changes the algorithm whenever they want to. And so, 1 week you might have 1,000 people coming a day. The next week you might have 10. And they don't allow you to customize based on what your community needs, because every community is unique. So I think that's one of the first most common mistakes. It doesn't mean you need to pay for a huge, massive enterprise platform. That's right for some people. It's not right for everyone. But you want to make your list of must-haves. What do we really need to understand? What do we really need to be able to do? And then compare that against platform features. There's plenty of great platforms like Circle that are, fit in the middle there, where they're not too pricey, but they have some customizability. I think the second big mistake goes back to my earlier answers, which is not taking the time to say, what are we trying to do here, and what are we doing for our community members, and do they want that? And so I treat this very much like product market fit. You should be having conversations. You should be trying to understand, what is it your customers are looking for? Are they getting it somewhere else, or is there a gap here? And then once you create your community, is it actually achieving that goal? If you're trying to create a sense of belonging, do they really feel like this is giving them the sense of belonging they're looking for? If you're trying to answer their questions, do they feel like they can find answers on your platform? Once you have that, again, it's really easy for the rest to kind of spill out from there. And then I would say the last big mistake is not investing enough in the community team. And obviously I'm biased here, but I do see a lot of platforms trying to hire someone who is both a high-level strategist as well as someone who's going to be in the weeds doing all the work within the community. And the fact of the matter is, very few people want to do both of those things. And so I really recommend to companies, if you are truly going to invest in community, you should hire a strategist, ideally a full-timer, but absolutely could be a consultant. Richard Millington, Brian Oblinger, Erica Kuhl. There are just some amazing consultants out there. And then hire someone who's really going to be in the weeds, living and breathing the community every day, talking to the community members, and who can just focus on that, because it's really hard to have somebody do both of those things.
Awesome. And I think, Evan, we just got a really interesting question in from the audience. So Abby asks, who owns the content created on a community?
Yeah, it's a good question. Your terms of service will determine that. I believe the way we do it at Reddit is that we are able to reproduce that work. So if we want to put it on a billboard, we can, though we usually ask our users before we do that. But ultimately, they own it as something that they have created. I think that's the right thing to do. And again, while we can use their content at any time, we tend to ask, because we'd rather them feel good about us using their content than feel bad. But ultimately, it's up to you how you want to structure your community and what makes the most sense for you. I would call out, again, if you're using a third-party platform like Facebook or Discord, you're also subject to their rules, and so they may own that content in some way as well.
Okay, that's interesting. We often overlook that it's not only your community, but also it could be Facebook's content. So people are not certain about when to market on Reddit. What are some underrated ways to use Reddit, Evan?
Yeah, for a business, I think there's a couple things. One is understanding what your target audience is driven by, what they're talking about. There are really fantastic conversations in pretty niche communities on Reddit talking about everything from knitting to shipping to Hollywood to everything in between. And so whatever your focus is, you can probably find someone talking about it and learn a lot about what they think, what they care about. The second thing is provide value.
Mm,
Communities, especially compared to just pure social networks, are very skeptical of people coming in and trying to promote their work, but they love help doing great things. And I think it's pretty easy to find a community in your space that has ambitions. They want to host a conference, or they want to make an ebook, or they want to organize a meetup. And you can help fund these things. You can help organize these things and really make a difference for these communities. And so that's where I would start, is just how can you provide value?
mm.
Whether it's a community about your brand or a community that is adjacent to your brand, it starts with listening, paying attention to what the social norms are, and then feel free to reach out to the moderators, but do it from a position of how can we help. Don't come in with an ask. If the first thing you do is say, hi, we're here from this brand, we want something from you, you're going to get a lot of pushback. If you come in saying, hi, we're from this brand, we love what you're doing, we want to help you, what do you need, I think you're going to get a lot more interest. And then, I'm sure our ads team would love for me to talk about ads, but I really think of ads as just an amplification there. The best ads on Reddit are ones that are pointing to some sort of project that the brand is doing with Reddit. So right now, Adobe is doing this Photoshop battles contest where they have this giant canvas and people can put things on it and illustrate it. And then they're running ads pointing people towards it. And it feels like a part of Reddit. You're much more likely to check it out because it's about Reddit versus just being, hey, check out our new software. And last shout out, we have a fantastic brand strategy team. So if you're interested, happy to connect you with them. And they are experts at engaging on Reddit.
I think, Evan, while answering this question, you brought up an interesting point about marketing on Reddit. And Pratigya has a question about that. She says, from being a community platform, it has turned into a platform wherein brands try and promote their product and services. Is it the new marketing channel, or will Reddit try and keep such things at bay?
Yeah, I mean, I think Reddit Inc. won't be your challenge. I think your challenge will be the moderators, because they're really trying to curate a high quality space. And so they're the ones who are going to look very critically at anything that anyone's posting to make sure that they're not spamming and they're not, creating low quality content. And so Reddit Inc. isn't actually the key entity there. It's the community. Do they think that your content is high quality? Because they have, a lot of say in what belongs in their communities and what they're comfortable with. So again, it's not about us. We can give you advice. It's about how you are engaging with the community and what value you're bringing.
Got it. And Evan, when we talk about building the community, are there any tools and strategies other communities could use to make them more active?
Yeah, I hesitate to suggest sort of engagement hacks, because I think ultimately it comes back to finding that fit. But if you think you've really found the fit and your community is providing value, for me, then I really look at what are the things that are going to get people to come back here regularly so they don't forget. Because that is the thing that will get you, is people say, oh yeah, I love that community, I just always forget to log in. And so one of the biggest things you can do there is create rituals. So, have a, greeting Monday, or have a happy hour on Fridays, whatever you can do so there's a regular expectation. You can also create these peak events. Communities are about everyday connection, but peak events really bring people in, they make them feel special. And so that can be a conference, that could be an AMA, that could be awards, whatever. And then lastly, I would look at, what just engages people in the real world. When I worked at User Voice, we had a customer service community, and I looked around for inspiration. And here in the US, we have the March Madness, basketball championship, and they have a bracket, who's going to make it all the way to the end and win. And so we did a bracket for which company was most likely to get worst customer service in America, which was something that was announced every year, worst customer service. And that made it this fun thing that everyone could, bet on. They weren't using real money, but just, guess who was going to win. And, I think, again, if you're doing things like that, but you don't have fit, people won't engage because they'll say, I don't really like this community, just doesn't mean anything to me. But if you do have fit, people go, oh, this is just a fun way to hang out with my friends. In the same way that if a stranger invites you to a basketball game, you're like, thanks, I don't know. But if a stranger, if your friends invite you, you're like, oh my God, I love hanging out with these people and I get to have this peak experience with them.
I love what you said about rituals because I think that really works, like work Wednesdays or something along what the community is based off of.
Yeah.
Um, is a hybrid community approach better than just a purely digital or a traditional approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think answering this question, it's important to kind of set COVID aside for a moment because
Yeah.
that's a whole complex issue of safety. But in my experience, yeah, hybrid offline and online can be really powerful. And I think offline can even be virtual events such as this. To me, it's more about, again, those peak experiences. It's a lot easier to create a peak experience in real life because people are very focused, they're present. They literally can't go off and do their laundry like they can at home. They're not on their phones, they're in the moment. So I would think of it more as day-to-day community versus peak experience, and I think combining the two is really powerful. And your peak experience can be a conference, it can be a meetup, but it also could be, everyone playing a game together. So I think the peak experiences are the things people remember. The day-to-day experiences are the things that actually maybe provide the most value and keep people engaged with the community. So I'm a huge fan of hybrid. I think it's just important to think about, what is the right thing that's going to feel like a peak experience for everyone, and also how do you make it equitable. One of the things I do like about the increase in online events is that, first of all, it's much easier to involve people across the globe. I'm here right now. It's 10:30 a.m. here in California. Much easier than me flying out there. And also, you can include people who may not be able to come to events even locally. So I do think there's something to be said for having at least some of your peak events be virtual because it opens up an audience you might not normally reach.
So true. Um, and Evan, how do you see Reddit? This is actually one of the questions the audience has asked. So Benita has asked this. How do you see Reddit grow in India?
Yeah, we've seen Reddit grow somewhat organically in India. We will probably be spending some time more actively engaging with our Indian users soon, and I'm excited for that. We will be hiring, some folks who are locals and actually can represent us locally. You know, it's always fascinating to me to see what grows in a local country because some of it looks like the rest of Reddit. There's definitely Indian meme communities, but some of it is very locally flavored. And I think what's amazing about communities and about Reddit in particular is that people create the spaces they want to see. And over here, a bunch of Americans over at Reddit, we're never going to come up with the communities that you all are. We would come up with very kind of Americanized communities that I don't think you all would enjoy. And so, our focus when we grow internationally is giving support, giving some amplification to kind of increase that growth, but really letting our community drive it because they're going to ultimately come up with ideas that make the most sense.
So a lot to look forward to for us in India with Reddit. Um, Evan Abbey asks, how would you classify community-oriented sites in the platform versus publisher discussion, especially if the site algorithm decides which communities bubble to the top?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is not so much my purview at Reddit, but I think a publisher deciding what things they're going to write is very different from a big crowd deciding what they're going to write. And I think it's also important to call out, Reddit has upvotes and downvotes, and those have a huge effect on what is successful on the platform. And so that is much more driven from the community, not from us.
Got it. And I think a little more about trust, Evan. How do you build trust? Anything else, any tools, anything else that other communities can use to build trust in, especially in a virtual community?
Yeah, this is something we've worked a lot on. Frankly, previous administrations at Reddit left us with a little bit of a trust deficit, and so it's something we've had to work on. And I think there are a lot of approaches here. The two biggest things are human connection and transparency. Human connection, feels obvious in retrospect, but we have this expectation that we need to communicate as a big brand and be like, here's our logo and here's our official statement. And nobody really enjoys that. It's necessary, but to make people trust your brand, they need to see your brand as people because people trust people, they don't trust corporations. And so a lot of what we've tried to do is create touch points where we can be humans. So I mentioned earlier our moderator advisory council. This is a rotating group of our moderators who sign an NDA and come and have private conversations with us, and they get to meet with product managers, they get to meet with people from marketing and legal and safety and our CEO, and just have honest human conversations about what's going on the platform. And those are always super productive because they're humans talking to humans. And so we've tried to extend this through, before COVID, doing road shows around the world. Now we're doing a lot of virtual gaming sessions. We'll be hosting other events for our moderators. So just creating that face-to-face connection is really powerful. And then on the transparency front, people are very good, and I think increasingly good in this modern age at seeing through any BS. So you really have to tell people why you're doing things and what you're doing. If you don't, they're going to play gotcha. They're going to say, wait, we noticed you did this thing, or you said you did this for this reason, but that's clearly not the reason. And then it becomes this adversarial relationship where, you're trying to get them to believe you versus just coming out and saying what you mean. We added additional ads to the platform a while back. And although, the kind of marketing brain sometimes says like, we should say this is for you, it's not. It's for the business. And the business is ultimately, the business's success is good for the community. They should want us to succeed. But we should also say this is because we wanted to make more money. We needed to make more money. And so I think the more you can be really, truly honest about what you're doing and why, and the more you can take people behind the scenes to see how complex it is. Part of the problem is also people boil things down to a very simple thing. You aren't building this fast enough. And you're like, well, it's actually more complex than that. But if you can show them rather than tell them, they're much more likely to believe you and be on board and be supportive.
Interesting. Evan, given that there's so many changes, even technology with AI, etc., how do you see these trends impacting communities? Do you see anything along, like, do you think, with AI coming in, would that impact how content is created on communities, do you think?
It's a good question. And I think anyone who says they know for sure is lying. I think we don't know where AI will go. My, probably biased take is, at the end of the day, humans talking to humans is a very unique thing. It's a very weird thing. It's not always predictable. You can have an AI reasonably, I think, replicate human, tone and content, but conversations are very complex things that are involving the personalities involved, what they're going through in that moment. There's research showing that people posting late at night are more likely to troll than in the morning. Sorry, you all are probably more likely to troll me right now. There's external factors, what site are they on? How visible are the rules? What's going on in politics right now? And so I just think we may get some somewhat believable facsimile of human conversation, but I think we'll always be able to tell the difference between a true human conversation because it's just not something you can predict. Now, that said, I said anyone who says they know the answer here is lying. I don't know. Maybe AI will just completely, take over. I think that is a bigger, hairier, and scarier question than just related to communities, because I think we really need to be thinking about what that means for us, and also how do we treat an AI that can have a conversation like a human? Is that a person? Is that a machine? I'm not paid to answer those questions, but we should probably be asking them.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think time will tell. And like you said, you can always differentiate between what is AI and probably what is a human being at the other end. Evan, I think we'll take one more question before we end the session. And it's from Gurleen. What type of content works best for getting people to join the community? And I'll just add in one more. Any tips, any last minute, golden rules that you think anyone should be cognizant of when running a community? So, yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to, boil it down to one type of content. But I think, again, going back to what your community goal is and what the goal of your community members is really important. When I was at User Voice, I was trying to create a space for customer service professionals to feel legitimate. They felt very much like, I'm here beside people who, have an MBA, and I just stumbled into this. I was a barista 3 years ago. And so how do I, how do I fit into this world? And so for them, it was really about content that was raw and open about the challenges they were facing, about the imposter syndrome they were feeling. For a support community, it might be much more about, here's a tip for how to handle this common bug or this common, use case. So I think it's going to depend. That said, the thing that will get the most people talking is something where people have a strong opinion and a specific opinion. If you're saying, like, do you like the new Pixel? That's a yes no question. That's not going to engage a lot of people. If you say, do you think Android or iPhone is better and why? That's something that many people have an opinion about, and they're going to get in there and give their specifics. So the more you can give people something to debate, to get into the nuance on without turning it into, a toxic situation, the better. And I think generally, that, to your secondary question, that is how I think about communities: is how can we get people having a conversation that's going to let them feel like they're really expressing themselves, and hopefully get them to listen to other people, and maybe some beneficial change come from that.
Awesome. And Evan, anything you would want to add for any golden rules to run a community before we end the session?
I mean, I think the golden rule: do unto others. When you're building a community, keep in mind that these are human beings. It can be
Yes.
hard to do, especially when you're looking at big numbers. At Reddit, we're dealing with really massive numbers. We really try and remember the human. It's one of our company values, because the moment you forget about it and see them as numbers, that's the moment you're going to lose the plot, and really struggle to create something of value for them.
Awesome. I think this is super helpful. And a lot of what you said is, I'm going to be taking that into account even when building Cool Kanya's community further. So thank you, Evan. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And thank you, and wish you all the best.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Thanks for staying up late, everyone, and for all the great questions.
Thank you.